Welcome to Therapist Confidential, a psychotherapy.net podcast. And now, here's your host, Travis Heath.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Therapist Confidential podcast. I'm your host, Travis Heath, and today we are joined by Dr. Stefanie Goerlich. Stephanie wears many hats: author, educator, certified sex therapist, expert witness, which we'll get into, like all sorts of cool titles. And, in this conversation, we'll hope to explore many of those. Like, what does it mean to be kink aware or kink affirming as a therapist? What does it mean working with people on the margins as it relates to consent, power, stigma? And hopefully just in general, we'll learn something about approaching human difference, perhaps with curiosity rather than pathologizing or judgment. So, Dr. Stefanie Goerlich, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Now, I tried to do some measure of justice to the work that you do, but I'm wondering if you can give us a little sense of who you are and the work that you're involved with.
Sure. I am a clinical social worker by training. I am a certified sex therapist. I have a PhD in clinical sexology, and I'm currently doing a second PhD in research social work. I have written 5 books on BDSM, kink, and mental health, and that tends to be sort of my area of research and academic interest. I teach sexual disorders and dysfunctions at one university, sexual trauma and trauma-informed care at another university, and then I mostly spend the rest of my time talking and writing about all of those things.
How the heck you had time to join me today for this conversation? I don't know, but I'm so glad you're here. And a second PhD, just why not?
I'm a little bit of an academic masochist and a merit badge collector, I'm not gonna lie.
I love it. Well, all of that makes for the perfect sort of conversation for this particular podcast. Okay, I want to start here because I think sometimes, especially in the modern world, social media and all the things, terminology just gets thrown around. And it's wild because I feel like 20 years ago or something, most people seem to be less certain about things, and it took a little while for terminology to start being adopted, and there was some caution. And now it's like a few TikTok videos and everyone's using the phrase kink or kink affirming or whatever. And sometimes I'm not even sure if we know what we're talking about. Now, you definitely know what you're talking about. So can we start just with the word kink? Can you help us understand that word and its meaning?
Absolutely. Kink, in my mind, is an umbrella term that really encompasses any sort of sexual or relational practice that is not normative for its time and place. That's a really important qualifier, and it speaks to exactly what you're describing about, sort of language changing and ideas changing. Because what is considered normal shifts over time based on where you're living, when you're living, the culture you're immersed in. And so, what we've thought of as kinky varies depending upon where and when you're living. So, the easiest way to understand kink is that it's anything that is not normative for its time and place.
Anything that's not normative, just in a general sense.
Well, mostly focused on sexuality and relationships.
And then I've seen this term more. I don't know if I'd say a lot, but more, like in bios or on Psych Today profiles or whatever, where therapists will talk about being kink aware or kink affirming. And I'm wondering if you could tell us some about what that might actually mean in practice.
Absolutely. So, there is a subtle difference between those two in my mind. They're often used interchangeably, but they shouldn't be because they mean two slightly different things. Kink aware means I understand what kink is. I might have had some continuing education training or some personal lived experience. And if I have a client that is kinky, I'm going to understand what they're talking about without needing them to teach me. Kink affirming, on the other hand, takes that a step further. Kink affirming means not only do I understand, do I have cultural competency in the kink community, but I am able to use my client's identity, their sexuality, their relational preferences as a clinical strength. I am able to lean into those pieces of themselves not only as important elements of our work together, but as things that I can leverage as the clinician to build upon.
Interesting. Yeah, that distinction seems really important. Yeah, normality's fascinating because I sometimes worry that therapy in general, and I don't think this is often done with malice or intent or anything like that. I think it happens unwittingly often, but therapy becomes this practice of producing more normalized citizens. And I worry about that because then what we're essentially saying, even if not saying it aloud, is that the closer a person mirrors a quote unquote normal pattern of behavior or takes on sort of normal identity markers, the more mentally healthy that person is. And that is something that, because it happens uh, sort of slowly and kind of underneath awareness, seems to me like it could be a really dangerous process.
Absolutely. I am not somebody that believes we should throw out, the DSM and the whole concept of diagnosing entirely. But I do think we need to be very clear-eyed about the tools that we use. And the tools that we use are effectively checklists of what is not normal. It's it is a menu of the full spectrum of abnormal, and it is our job, quote unquote, as clinicians to kind of hold our client up against this menu and figure out how normal or not are they and in what specific way. And you're right, that does become problematic because we're not thinking of things as normative, right? A lot of people have anxiety. A lot of people live with depression. If we cared about what was normal, we would only focus on statistics. But that's not really what we're doing. We're looking at behavior, we're looking at social cues, we're looking at how productive or not we perceive this person to be, and in some extreme cases, how useful or valuable or not we perceive a person to be. And then we're labeling them accordingly, and that does become a tool of social reinforcement rather than a medicalized support.
You helped us understand the difference between just kink aware and kink affirming. And, you were talking about in a sort of kink affirming practice, the way that some of those kinks are actually sort of incorporated as an asset in that person's life. And I'm wondering if you can, maintaining confidentiality, of course, and all those good things, maybe take us inside an example of how that actually looks in your practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably the most common example would be BDSM, which is one of the more common forms of kink that most people are aware of. And BDSM comes with various forms of power exchange. It can look like different things, it can include different types of power, it can be limited or unlimited, but at the end of the day, BDSM practitioners are playing with power. A lot of my practice is couples work. And having those intentional, negotiated, consensual power imbalances can actually be really powerful when we're working on supporting somebody who might be struggling with ADHD, for example, right? Somebody might really struggle to remember their daily routine or to complete important tasks just because they're neurodivergent and they're not wired for consistency. But when they are wired relationally for BDSM, when that is an important part of how they connect with their partner, then maybe those daily tasks become a part of their service to their partner. Maybe taking care of themselves is a part of how they enact that power imbalance. And so doing things like that can be really powerful. And then it can also be reversed, right? Like I have worked with many dominant folks who might struggle with anxiety or depression. And when you're in the throes of depression, it can be really hard to value yourself and care about yourself and find the motivation to do what you need to do to feel better. But when you're in a power exchange relationship with somebody who you have agreed you are responsible for, Now we can look at some of those self-care behaviors, some of those coping strategies as being ways in which they're living their power dynamic and ways in which they're honoring their obligation to their partner when they might not necessarily feel worthy of doing it for themselves. So those are two very simple, sort of off the cuff and non-confidential examples, but there's some of the more common ways in which we might use kink as a clinical strength.
Yeah, interesting. The phrase playing with power is fascinating to me. Can you talk a little bit more about that phrase and how, because often power is thought of as something that's very serious. And of course, it can be very serious, and power can cause harm, right? And has for as long as there have been human beings. But that's why that sort of there's an interesting sort of paradox there, playing with power, that I want to hear more about.
I think a part of it is just recognizing that there is a power dynamic in every relationship. Even folks that are living very quiet, very monogamous, very vanilla lives have a power dynamic in their relationship. Often it's not intentional, it's not negotiated, it's kind of a default setting that we fall into, right? Over the 5 years we've been married, we've realized that you're really good at taking out the garbage and I'm never gonna remember to make the car payment, right? Like, we kind of fall into patterns by default. People that play with power in their relationships, who engage in intentional power exchange, the focus really becomes that intentionality. It can look like anything, but it's not a default setting. It's not a routine they've fallen into. They are conscious, intentional choices that are made and sometimes remade or renegotiated or undone that make those default settings much more transparent, much more overt, and that opens up space for play, right? If I know that I'm never gonna remember to make the car payment, and I'm gonna ask you to be in charge of the finances because if I do, we will be overdrawn every week. I am giving you that power, right? You now have financial authority in our relationship. Not because I'm being abused, but because I have said, not a strength, I'm giving it to you. That's a serious form of power exchange. But once you start doing those things intentionally, it can turn into something like, well, what would it look like if you picked out my lingerie every day? And I spent the whole day knowing that under my clothes, I was wearing something that only you and I knew that you had selected. Maybe that might make me feel like I have a sexy secret. Maybe that might make me feel like you're really tuned in and paying attention to me and the little details of me. And how do those things that are important, they're not the car payment, but how do those little power exchanges enhance the relationship and make me feel more connected or make you feel more engaged? That's what I mean when I talk about playing with power.
Mm, I'm glad I followed up. Okay, you were talking about BDSM, and I think sometimes BDSM is often misunderstood as, violence or abuse of some sort, right? And just with like even the car payment example, you were sort of going down this road a little bit, right? But I'm wondering if you can tell us some about what you've learned about the psychology of consent as it pertains to BDSM, and maybe that misunderstanding of it being violence or abuse.
Yeah. So I want to start by being really clear about what's included within BDSM. Because you're right, people tend to assume that we're talking only about some elements, like what people might characterize as violence.
Yeah.
BDSM is my favorite acronym because it's a Swiss Army knife. It contains several concepts within it. So we have B&D, which is bondage and discipline. Bondage and discipline is an exchange of control. That can be control of speech, control of movement, control of behavior. It can happen in a relationship. It can also be practiced solo. I know people that really love rope bondage, and they don't need somebody else to do that. They'll do self ties. So, recognizing that some parts of BDSM can be solo activities is important. And really thinking about that control piece, right? Like, if you were to tell me, I want you to come on my podcast, but I will only record with you if you are standing in the corner facing the wall the entire time. Technically, that's an act of discipline. Partly because you are putting a parameter in place that I can choose to accept or not. So I would be either giving you that power or not. And partly because we are not physically in the same space. So you're not making me stand in the corner. I am engaging in self-discipline by choosing to do that, even when my feet get tired, even when I'm bored looking at the wall. So exchange of control focuses on those behavioral movement sort of external things, and it can be individual or partnered. Then we have DS, which is what a lot of people think of when they think of BDSM, dominance and submission. Dominance and submission is exchange of authority. That comes back to the car payment example I gave. I might never, ever, ever want to be tied up, have no interest in having my movement or my speech controlled, but very much want my partner to be the one that makes the decisions in our relationship. That's the difference between authority and control. They blur together, but you can have authority exchange without ever engaging in any sort of bondage or discipline. Authority exchange really comes down to who has the final decision-making authority in the relationship and when and under what circumstances. So that can be bedroom only. That can be a 24/7. That can be anything in between. Maybe my partner wants me to pick out his necktie every day. And that's our subtle little act of authority exchange. Is that going to carry over into I want you to make all the financial decisions? No, but it still counts as a form of authority exchange. Then we have the last piece, which is the one that I think most people are a little bit leery of, a little bit scared of, and that is sadomasochism, sadism and masochism. People often think about this as pain or as violence. When I'm teaching, I reframe it as exchange of sensation. Because coming back to kink being whatever's not normal for its time and place, how we think about pain is very subjective and it's very cultural. Pain is not a values neutral word in our Western world. You know, we numb pain, we avoid pain, we mitigate pain, we prevent pain. So if we talk about sadism and masochism as giving and receiving pain, in our culture, we're kind of already starting from that place of, oh, that sounds negative, that sounds potentially bad. But pain is one form of sensation. And my version of pain might be very different than yours. You might have a much higher pain threshold than I do. Maybe I get snapped with a rubber band and I'm in tears. Maybe you have a hook through your back and you're having a great time. So thinking about things as exchange of sensation puts it in a little bit more of a neutral territory while still holding space for what folks are doing. The exchange of authority and the exchange of sensation are often what people get very concerned about in terms of abuse, in terms of violence. I tell my students all the time that the key difference between consensual kink and abuse is if you say stop to your kinky partner, they will stop. If you say stop to your abuser, they will not. That is the core thing, is that we can only have power exchange when I actually have power to give. I have power to give you, that means I can take it back. In an abusive relationship, my power has been stolen from me. And I am no longer making intentional choices about what power you have and what I would prefer to keep for myself. And so it really, the key differentiator comes down to, if I say, I don't want this anymore, will that carry weight? Kink can always be stopped, modified, or ended. Abuse can't.
Wow. That sums it up, I think, really well, that last line. Yeah, it's interesting because I think as, let's just say in United States, I don't want to overgeneralize here, but in United States, historically, and I would argue still largely to this day, we don't talk well about sex. If we talk about sex at all, I mean, it's like, comprehensive sex education, for example, seems to be disappearing some places, right, in favor of abstinence only, which, like if you look at the data on that, it's like, well, if you want to offset the age of first intercourse by 6 to 18 months, great, then go with abstinence only. But there's all of these other sort of factors involved that aren't being considered. And so when I say we don't talk about it well, the point I'm trying to make is like, this seems to be cultural. It's not like individual people that are doing this, right? And so I think, and you would be more privy to the numbers on this, but I would imagine that, like even when I think about what's normal with regard to sexual practice, like how much do we even know that? Like, I think we know what's supposed to be normal via what the culture tells us. And yet, having been a therapist for 20 plus years, there are more people than I think most people think that don't fall in that sort of continuum of normalcy, right? And so, I guess part of what I'm getting at here is like, how hard is it to even begin to determine what's normal or not normal as it pertains to anything, but especially sexual practice, which is something we don't talk well about?
So there are a lot of researchers, sexologists, sociologists doing research on understanding human sexual behavior. And they can be really helpful. These are papers and studies that I cite a lot in my work. But you get slightly different numbers everywhere you go, right? Because everybody's using their own sort of operant definitions. They're working with slightly different communities. We have some great research out of Australia about how many people identify as submissive and dominant. But that's going to look slightly different from folks in Belgium because, again, time and place. We just have different cultures, even if we're still thinking about, well, these are, Western 21st century cultures. So you do have to do a little bit of extrapolation and you do kind of have to look at all of the evidence as a range of numbers as opposed to a specific, we know 43.7% of people are really into pony play, right? Like we're never going to get that precise at a global level. But there are enough studies out there that we can get a good feel for what is normal but not spoken of, which I think is what you're talking about.
Yes.
And then also a lot of times when I'm doing legal consulting or teaching work and something is really, really niche, I will go to FetLife, which is a kinky social media site, and just look at how many groups exist for this specific behavior and how many people are in those groups. I don't go any deeper than that because FetLife users are entitled to their privacy and I'm never going to contradict that. But it can be fascinating for a classroom or a jury or even a clinician that I'm just doing a peer consult with to hear, well, my client has this really kind of unusual thing that I've never heard of and I'm not sure how I feel about, and I'm worried it might be a little pathological. And then I come back and I'm like, well, there's 37,000 people around the world that are actively talking about it right now. Is that like statistically significant data? No. Is it incredibly helpful for contextualizing a specific person? Absolutely.
So for the therapists who make up the vast majority, I would assume, of folks listening to this particular podcast, for the therapists listening, is there a time where pathology intersects with sexual behavior? And if so, how do you start to distinguish? I mean, we have the DSM, and you can tell me, as the expert on this, how helpful the DSM actually is there. I would imagine, like most things, it's of some use, but it's also probably problematic in other ways. But how do you start to navigate that line of sexual behavior that becomes problematic?
So this is one of the times when I think that the DSM has actually in recent years gotten it right. The problem is, I don't think a lot of us are really thoroughly reading the DSM. I think we're flipping to the checklists and just going down the boxes. But the DSM right now for the paraphilias specifically says that having a paraphilia, a fetish, or a kink is not in and of itself enough to justify a diagnosis. That it also has to either be causing the person's clinically significant distress or it needs to be causing other people clinically significant distress. There needs to be an element of disruption in life and activities and functioning and social behavior. And when we ground our analyses in those two things, I think very quickly a lot of behavior becomes, if not normalized, at least not pathologized. The problem is that so many clinicians that I work with are not doing that. They are stopping at, my client said something that makes me feel weird and uncomfortable that I've never heard of before, or that I wouldn't want for myself and in my relationship. Therefore, it's pathological. And that's not actually what the DSM says.
Have you learned anything about how to advise these clinicians when, because there are a lot of things as therapists that might make us uncomfortable as we listen, but it does seem like there's something about sex in particular, right? That's just different than like, oh, I'm uncomfortable with how they live their life in X, Y, or Z other ways. I think good therapists anyways are usually still pretty good at leaning in with curiosity, doing the whole bit. But there's something about sex that I think sometimes makes that more difficult. Have you learned anything about how to sort of advise or mentor folks into doing that better?
Yeah, I do a lot of educational work around kink affirming risk assessment, around how to separate out maybe my personal reaction to what you're doing versus how what you're doing is actually situated within the life, relationships, and world of the client. I agree with you. I think that sex adds a twist that just culturally we are not comfortable with. And there actually are folks like Charles Moser, Peggy Kleinplatz, icons in our field who have made an argument for years, if not decades, that we shouldn't be separating out sexual behavior from other behaviors, right? That we don't need a sadism diagnosis because we have an antisocial personality diagnosis. And if somebody is genuinely engaging in sadism that meets the criteria of the DSM, right? If they're causing harm and distress to others, why do we need a separate category to say, well, it's sexual harm and distress? Why does that not fall under the broader umbrella of antisocial behavior, right? And the same thing with things like some of our paraphilias, some of our fetishes. Why do we need to parse that out because it is a sexual behavior? If it meets the DSM criteria, why is that not just considered a compulsive behavior? Why is that not just considered under the umbrella of other mental health diagnoses? Sexuality is the only area where all of a sudden we create a whole separate subset of diagnoses just because somebody might be undressed when they're doing it. And I don't know that that makes a lot of sense. But that said, the somebody might be undressed piece does make clinicians uncomfortable. And we are trained to be so sensitive to the risk of sexual abuse and sexual trauma that a lot of things do feel heavier or more impactful when we hear them because they're sexual behaviors. And so that's where I think really being very granular and clear in our risk assessment, in the questions that we're asking, in the pieces that we're looking for, so that we can really situate a specific behavior within the client's world, not necessarily within our comfort zone, is really important to effective diagnosing. Um, I have like 16 or 18 different questions that I am looking at when I'm assessing risk from a kink affirming perspective. And I don't necessarily know that it would be super fun for your audience to listen to me rattle those off. But what I could do is I can make those available as like a PDF that if anybody wants that and they're listening to us, they can download it afterwards.
I love that. Yes, send that our way and well, I won't because I don't know how to do such a thing, but Kyle and Shelly, who are amazing at the behind the scenes stuff, will make sure that gets tacked on there. I think that would be great. Okay, a couple more questions here, and then I want to transition into some of your expert witness sort of stuff because I find that fascinating also. But I think many therapists who may not be experts in this area, certainly not an expert at the level you are, they worry about getting this wrong. Like they have good intentions, they're listening to and going like, okay, yes, I want to do all this stuff, but they're afraid of getting it wrong when clients bring up a kink or maybe quote unquote non-traditional relationships, whatever. And, it's not reasonable for us to become instant experts. So I'm wondering, for people listening, what would be a good starting point for folks that are worried about getting it wrong with this sort of thing?
Yeah. I think it's really important to handle erotic minorities, which in my world includes kinky people, folks with fetishes, people with non monogamous or alternative relationship structures, to treat those as distinct and valuable subcultures, and to approach our clients when they come to us from a cultural humility perspective, which means not asking them to teach us about their lives. They're not paying us our session fee to become our teachers, but recognizing that I want to do right by this person and I'm not entirely sure what they need. So seeking out our own educational materials on, what does DS look like? What is the language used? What do I need to know about terminology in polyamory in order to support this client of mine? Recognizing that this isn't just an isolated behavior. For many of our clients, it is a core part of their identity. And we want to be just as informed and culturally aware of this piece of their identity as we would about their ethnicity or their religious practice. We want to know keywords and key concepts. We want to understand what they're telling us without needing to stop and ask them to explain it. And that means doing our own learning. I have written a lot about this, and most of my books are clinical. And I'm never going to say, don't read my stuff because I thought it was important enough to write down. But you shouldn't only read my stuff. I think it's really important to be reading things that are written by members of this community. If you have a client who is in an SM relationship, who is very into sensation exchange, they're going to be different than somebody who's super into bondage but never wants a lot of intense sensation. So you're going to want to be reading materials, watching videos, seeking out resources written by SM practitioners, because what you know about bondage isn't going to help here. And if you have somebody who says that they're non monogamous, that's not necessarily the same as polyamorous. So you want to ask more about what that looks like for them. You don't want to assume that because you've had 7 poly clients before, you know how to handle these folks, because they might have a very, very different relationship structure. And it's on you to get enough about them to understand what you need to learn, and then to do your own learning about that specific part of their culture.
You have written about therapists, I think the phrase was romancing the kink, which was interesting to me. One, can you help us understand what that means? And two, why idealizing a client's sexuality might be equally problematic as compared to judging that sexuality.
We want to be ideally sex positive and affirming, and to model unconditional positive regard, and to not kink shame. We want to be these models of progressive psychotherapy. And sometimes that kind of turns into a fetishization of our clients' identities. It goes from kink is a part of who you are, and that's important for me to know, but you're here because you're struggling with OCD, not because you're struggling with your kink identity.
Mm.
I have worked with a lot of clinicians that want so desperately to model sex positivity and inclusion that they get really hung up on the kink piece, not in a stigmatizing way, but in another direction. There's a big conversation happening in our world right now about whether or not kink itself can be therapeutic. There are people who have tried to copyright the phrase kink affirming therapy. There are people who have doing a lot of research on whether or not kink can be a modality in itself. And that, in my mind, often kind of falls into romancing the kink, because it takes somebody's lived experience and their relationship preferences and it turns it into this external thing that can be applied. And in the same way that we don't want to objectify other people or take facets of somebody's identity and turn it into a cure-all for other things that they're struggling with. We don't want to do that with kink too. And I think that the impulse to be sex positive will often make our clients' kink piece so shiny and exciting for us. And we know that it's a stigmatized identity, and we know that kink is marginalized, and we just want to show them how much we support them, that it overtakes what they might actually be needing to talk to us about.
Hmm. Okay. I could follow up on that, but I want to make sure we get a little time to talk about another thing before we wrap up. So, you have a background in forensic social work, and, you've been doing some expert witnessing that we've been talking about before we started recording. But as a starting place here, I'm wondering, just this background in forensic social work, how that's continued to shape your views about deviance, about criminality, and maybe about the labels that get placed on people.
Yeah. That's actually, when I'm moving in academic circles, you'll often be asked, like, "What's your area of research interest? Like, what's your focus?" And I very quickly learned that if I said BDSM and kink, it would derail everything because academics are not ready for that. But if I say, "Oh, conceptualizations of deviance," now all of a sudden I'm using the $4 words that make people very excited. And I'm talking about the same thing, right? But what I'm fascinated by is exactly that. It's how we decide what is deviant, who is deviant, and how we treat them once we've sorted them into that. And that comes right back to the DSM conversation in the beginning, right? Like, we have a cultural script for what is normal. And when somebody deviates from that, we don't handle that well. And so, how do we decide, group by group, person by person, who is deviant? And then how do we reconcile what that means? Can somebody be deviant without being dangerous? Historically, most of human civilization has said no. Most cultures, if you are not within the norm, you are a threat to the norm and we must deal with you accordingly. Now we're in this more enlightened period where we're celebrating diversity and celebrating difference, but there's still that sort of edge between difference and deviance. And I'm fascinated by how that edge moves and how we react when we feel like somebody's crossed over into it.
Mm. Difference and deviance. It seems often, and I think you were alluding to this, that difference is assumed deviant.
If you look at sociological theory like stigma theory, absolutely. There's this idea of spoiled identities that some people have unspoiled identities. They fit within the social box, the social norm. We love them. Some people have things that are overt and obvious and typically stigmatized within a culture. Things like developmental disabilities are stigmatized. Obesity and body shape is stigmatized in our world right now. Things that you can't necessarily hide. Race is stigmatized in America.
Yeah.
So those are what Goffman would talk about as like overt, like you show up spoiled. You can't hide it. It's written in your body and your presence and just who you are, and society treats you accordingly. But then there's this other group, this more insidious group, this group that looks like they're normal until you find out really they are spoiled and you didn't know it. And society tends to react to those people very differently, even than the folks that are overtly stigmatized, because you looked like you were one of us until you weren't. And that triggers betrayal and fear and a whole other series of activations. And that's where a lot of our sexual behaviors come into place, right? You might look like the stereotypical college educated upper middle class white male that is like the default prestige position in our society. And then it leaks that you like to wear women's underwear. And that's not something anybody ever could have known by looking at you. And the minute we know that, now not only are you a spoiled identity under stigma theory, but it's going to feel much more dangerous to us because it was secret, because it wasn't something we could tell just by looking at you. And when the deviance is hidden, we respond as if it's dangerous.
So your work as an expert witness. Now, I was speculating prior to us starting recording here that probably there weren't very many people, who were an expert witness in the particular areas that you're an expert in. And then you were like, no, there's like sort of 5 of us there's more who might claim to do it or whatever, but there's like 5 real experts of which you are one, which is pretty amazing in itself. But I'm wondering if you can, one, tell us like what it means to be an expert witness, and 2, if you could share some of the most interesting experiences that you've had in being an expert witness.
Cool. So a lot of times when people think about doing expert witness work, they assume there's a lot of like trial testimony involved. We're thinking of sort of Law and Order episodes or Criminal Minds.
Yeah.
And in America, just the way our criminal justice system works, something like 85 to 90% of cases never go to trial. So a lot of the work that I do actually happens on the back end. It is doing independent evaluations of my client, meaning the attorney's clients. It is teaching the attorneys what they need to know in order to conceptualize their case appropriately, to explain things to a judge when perhaps, they're filing a motion. They need to be able to explain the logic behind their requests without having the ability to have me be the one to explain it to a judge. So it's a lot of sort of pretrial prep and psychoeducation around whatever the case may be. I also do a lot of super fun they're called teaching reports. So I might be asked to research a specific fetish or a specific subculture within the kink community. And to come back to what you and I were talking about, do my best to come up with stats where stats are available, show how common or uncommon this is, because all of that is really helpful when a jury is trying to figure out what facts matter here and how do I know whether this is just different or whether this is deviant. So that's a lot of what I do. I would say 90% of my expert witness work happens before I would ever need to witness in terms of giving testimony. In terms of the kind of cases that I work with, there are a lot involving what I've come to call just like dubious consent or questionable consent. And often that takes the form of, well, you said you were super into bondage, and I said I was super into bondage, and that means we're compatible, so let's get together and do a bondage scene. And halfway through, I realized that what I meant when I said bondage is not what you meant when you said bondage, and I'm no longer having fun, right? It's people who thought they were on the same page and then tragically were not. Sometimes it is people talking about their fantasies or their fetishes online and ending up in situations where they were talking to a police officer who maybe did not interpret that as fantasy and role play. And sometimes in really serious cases, this is some of the hardest work I've done and also I think some of the most important work. There are a number of states that have what are called sexually violent predator laws, meaning that somebody can be convicted of a crime, a sex crime. They can serve their sentence. They can be due to be released. And in states that have these laws, the state can come in and say, no, actually, we think that you should be involuntarily committed. We don't believe that you are safe in the community, and we want to have you committed to a psychiatric hospital until we decide that you're safe. And that's indefinite. There's not a fixed time limit on that. It is literally you go from jail to the hospital and you stay in the hospital until we decide you can leave, which might be never. A lot of times when I explain this to people, they're like, well, double jeopardy, right? Like you can't do that. They've already been convicted. They've already served their time. But double jeopardy doesn't apply because civil commitment is considered a civil trial, not a criminal trial. So you can absolutely, in states with those laws, plead guilty, serve your time, do everything you need to do to complete your punishment for whatever the crime was, and then come out and be told, nope, never mind, you're still not going home. You might never get to go home. You will not be surprised to hear, as we've been talking about deviance versus dangerous, hidden, and how we have reactions to hidden behavior, that a lot of SVP cases involve elements of BDSM and kink. And those sorts of things, I've had cases where the kind of porn that they liked was used as evidence that they should be hospitalized. And that is stigmatizing. And that is not just in my world. Other people, I'm sure, I guarantee you, people listening to this are going to be like, that is fabulous. We don't want violent predators on the street. I support this. And that's fine. But what I personally don't want is a world where you can do everything right in terms of going through a trial, being sentenced, and serving your time, and then get hit with an entire another thing that's open-ended. That doesn't feel fair to me constitutionally. And more importantly, even if we're all going to agree that it is, I don't ever want somebody's kink identity or their sexual desires weaponized against them in order to create this two-tier system. And so a lot of what I do in terms of teaching work is talking to people about how common or how rare something is. What are the connections between sexual sadomasochism and sexual assault? Breath play is huge right now. Breath play has become so normalized amongst college students that they don't even identify as kinky. They're just super into breath play, which blows the minds of a lot of kinky people. But in a criminal context, strangulation is an enhanced sentencing factor. Strangulation increases the risk of death and homicide in domestic violence. And so when you have a case where somebody's like, oh, I'm super into breath play, and then they end up in a criminal context, the prosecutors are absolutely approaching that as you are at higher risk of committing homicide, you are at high risk of violence, when often, especially amongst college students today, that's not at all how they think about it. So a lot of the work that I do really comes down to advocating for kinky people, and kink behaviors as being normal and natural pieces of the spectrum of sexual diversity. And that talking to finders of fact, talking to attorneys in order to mitigate the harm of stigma that kinky people so often experience when they encounter the legal system.
I imagine you can't know the answer to this question for sure, but just what's the sense you're getting of how your work is being received by judges, attorneys, etc.?
So I will tell you, I don't really advertise. All of the legal work that I do is word of mouth. And I have attorneys reaching out to me multiple times a week. I turn down more cases than I take, because if I genuinely hear the details of a case and I think my client's person needs to be in jail, I'm not going to help them not be in jail. But the cases that I take, I genuinely believe that there is stigma or misunderstanding involved, and I want to work really hard to clarify that, not to influence a specific outcome, but to make sure that whatever decision is made with appropriate information and therefore made fairly.
Okay, here's where I want to end. I mean, I don't want to end, but we have to. So if you could redesign, formalize graduate training tomorrow, one, just generally, how might you do it? And then two, is there a particular course or something else that you believe would be essential for trainees that maybe isn't often offered?
This is super easy for me to answer because I just wrote a paper about this that I'm working to get published. And you're going to be shocked by how basic my answer is. Every clinician, every future clinician needs to have a human sexuality class. Right now, that is not mandatory. It is not required by any of our professional organizations. Most of them will have, we need some sort of cultural competency, or this would be a good elective. But none of them say, in order to be a clinical social worker, you have to have human sexuality. In order to be a counselor, you have to have human sexuality. In fact, the marriage and family therapy credentialing body actually says, you know what, this is important, but if it goes against the school's values, if it's a religious school, then it's optional. You don't need to do it. So we have an overwhelming majority of future clinicians graduating every year who maybe, if they were lucky, had the option to take human sexuality as an elective. But very few clinical programs require it, and none of the credentialing bodies expect them to. The school where I'm doing my PhD, I love them. I'm very, very big fan of my academic institution. But we have an undergraduate degree, a bachelor's degree in women and gender studies that you can graduate from without ever taking a human sexuality class. And I don't know how you do gender studies without ever discussing human sexuality. So it's really that simple. We have to start by teaching people the basics because when they don't understand normative sexual behavior, then they have no framework for niche sexual behavior. And that leads itself to pathologization and that leads itself to stigma. And we need to start just by giving our future clinicians the basics so that maybe they're inspired to keep learning.
I also wonder too, you know, so often we assume with a title of a course that it covers what needs to be covered. And I'm not saying, that an instructor runs out of time or this and that, these things happen. I'm talking about the standardized course content. I could imagine human sexuality courses, some places not offering some of what you've talked about today, for example. And so it seems like, yeah, human sexuality course essential. That makes a lot of sense. And I actually didn't know what you just said. I'm glad you're writing about it, that this isn't required. But then also, making sure that it covers
Mhm.
the content that is relevant to our time. Like a human sexuality course from 25 years ago. This is true with a lot of courses, but I don't know what it is in academia. And it seems like in psychology, there's stuff to listen. We can learn stuff from the folks that came before us. I'm not denying that. And also, we have to design curriculum and treatment approaches that meet this particular moment in time. So, all that to say, are there particular things that, like content areas that you think are essential in such a course?
I obviously think BDSM and kink are really important, if only because when we don't encounter it in our learning, we tend to assume it's much more niche and much more uncommon than it actually is. You know, pop pop psych surveys have been done that have shown that over half of respondents tell researchers that they've at least experimented with kink. And roughly 1 in 3 engage in some form of BDSM like once a month. It is not rare. If we wanna just come back to statistics, this is mainstream normative practice. But if we're not learning that, then we assume that every person we've met is the only one out there. And so having even just a high level survey version of a human sexuality class that includes BDSM and kink is important. I also think alternative relationship structures, not just polyamory, but other forms of ethical non monogamy, are really important for people to understand because they are growing. Something like 30 to 40% of 20 somethings now say that they would prefer a non monogamous relationship. How do we help those clients individually or doing couples and partner work years down the road if we're not aware that this is a normative lifestyle choice, a normative relationship model now? And we're not adequately preparing our students with that. So, absolutely, my sexual trauma class is 14 weeks long. And at the end of every semester, there's a laundry list of topics my students wish we could have gone deeper in. So any human sexuality class is going to be a survey. You're never going to deep dive. But I do think right now academia has a problem of assuming that the niche topics are niche and that the PhD students will dive into it because it's their hyper focused area of expertise, but that your everyday clinician grad student doesn't necessarily need to know. And we need to move beyond that. And we need to start recognizing that the niche is normal and preparing our grad students to respond as if this is a normal everyday encounter, because it absolutely is.
Dr. Stefanie Goerlich, thank you so much. Is there a place, if people are interested in learning more about you, the writing you've done, where they can find that?
Yeah, my website is my name, StephanieGoerlich.com. It has links to my books. It has a way to contact me, more information about who I am and what I do if somebody needs any sort of legal consultation. But mostly I just hang out and wait for people to ask me fun questions like this. So, you can always find me there.
I'm glad my questions were fun, but your answers were substantive and thought-provoking and essential, I think, for therapists to hear. So I thank you so much for your time, and let this not be our last conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.